We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Hey, wonderful people! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beeson Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. As joining me in segment number 2, we're going to have one of our good friends aboard as Rob Donaldson does great work over at the Rob's Best Bet Show, and we're going to be chatting with him about what we did see in the NBA draft decisions. On top of that, just what we're seeing in terms of like the eligibility front on so many of these players and sort of the little bit of mystery that we have around that. Right now, we're going to be taking a look at some of the guys that are still remaining in the portal that could be able to make a little bit of an impact and talk a little Big East as well. And then in the final segment, going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Thursday. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Juden_D1. And keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And did not get in any Twitter/X questions, so we'll put you guys on blast here. Whatever you want to hear on this podcast in segment number 1, just fire in a question at the Twitter/X feed is always your most reliable way of being able to do so, because I don't know what you guys want to hear unless you fire in a question, so please do that. But I do think that now is the time of year where you do want to be just watching the news wire for eligibility, because right now it used to be with the NCAA like 5 to 6 years ago, you had no idea whether or not those transfers were going to be eligible, ineligible, because we were in a time like 5 years ago where you just had no idea if a guy would be eligible immediately, if they had to be a sit-out transfer, what have you. That was a big giant whatchamado, but now we're finding a lot of rulings in terms of eligibility. And Dante just got shut down for a year of eligibility. We are going to be talking about that with Rob Donaldson in the next segment. I know that Jordan Dingle, along with, I believe, Chris Ledlum of St. John's, they were trying to petition the NCAA for an additional year because they were out there to begin their careers over at the Ivy League, and that got shot down. But apparently, according to Transfer Portal for Playing Time at TP4PT, the NCAA grants an extra year of eligibility to all D1 athletes ineligible since the 2019-20 season, which I don't know if this is for real or not. I was joking that Perry Ellis now has a way to be able to get year number 47 for his just illustrious college basketball career. But I mean, it is really interesting to take a look at right now what is happening in college basketball, because you've got the COVID year that is in play, and that causes for some eligibility questions. So I would say if you're looking to bet on any sort of futures or anything like that, it's a little bit less prevalent and it's a little bit less, shall we say, immediate for someone that's a game-to-game bettor. Because if you were looking at the Chris Ledlum situation and you didn't know for like 2 days that he was going to be ineligible, you probably didn't lose too much, because when it comes to gauging St. John's on June 2nd as opposed to May 31st, yeah, you're going to be fine. So you just want to be doing this throughout the offseason. You don't need to really put a whole bunch of emphasis on it. And hey, if there is a guy that there's some eligibility questions on and you find out that they're going to be all good to go or something like that, maybe you are able to find a little bit of value on the futures market. As you guys know, listening to this podcast, I am not a futures guy, so you sort of do that at your own peril. And I'll have people on throughout the offseason that they are much more into the futures market than I am. I always find that if you're looking to do the futures market right in college basketball this time of year, you sort of do the old, and I've got to get this guy on the podcast at some point as well, Aaron Kessler model, which you may remember he used to do some great work over at the Golden Nugget back in the day. He would always just build a portfolio of a bunch of like long shots that were like north of 100 to 1. He would find a few preseason, he would find a few during the season, and very nearly hit on Texas Tech when they played that national title game against Virginia. But I do think that this is something that you do want to be monitoring. Like I said, if you find out N'Faly Dante say, like 2 days after the fact, that he's not going to be getting an extra year and you're a game-to-game better, no big deal. You just want to be catching up on it throughout the offseason. If you're a little bit more of a futures better, want to be a little bit more on top of it, but certainly just something to keep in mind as we go through this offseason. And we try to keep you guys mindful of all that we're seeing in the offseason with the best guests humanly possible. And coming up next, we're going to be chatting about these NBA draft decisions and so much more with Rob Donaldson here on Just Go Six with myself, Greg Peters, and now a part of the Decent Family Podcast. And we're back here in Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Decent Family Podcast. It is always great to be joined by this man. It's Rob Donaldson. He does such a great job taking a look at so many different things. College basketball, baseball, football, you name it, he does it. He is doing a tremendous job over on youtube.com/Rob Donaldson with his show, The Rob's Best Bet Show. That's mainly baseball this time of year. And once college basketball rolls around, he's going to be doing a great job on that front, as you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at RobDFB all together. And Rob, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Greg. And certainly when we're talking college basketball in May, it just kind of speaks to how this sport has kind of become an all-year-round thing. And we mention every single time we hop on here, but the transfer portal, the coaching carousel, and then this late NBA draft declaration window has really just opened up the sport for nonstop news, and that's awesome.
Oh, it certainly is. And in terms of the draft decisions that we saw come down over the last 48 to 72 hours, just the generic question here, were there any surprises to you? Because I don't think that there was anything like over the top, but I will say, team in San Francisco losing Jonathan Mogbo, I felt like they might have been the biggest losers of them all.
Kind of to your point, I do think it kind of played out to chalk, I guess, if you want to kind of say that in terms of the betting terminology, or just kind of the expected. There wasn't really anybody who declared that. It just kind of baffled me. And similarly, there wasn't a lot of guys who stayed after everything was said and done. That really baffled me. It was nice to see Alex Garabin go back to UConn because, UConn being up in the sport is definitely, I think, a good thing overall. You needed somebody that you're kind of targeting to bring down from the mountain. And, he's definitely going to bring some life back to that program this next season. So I would say they're probably the biggest winners just because, they lost pretty much everybody and at least they retained something.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I thought that was the biggest decision to the positive. And then I also thought that Mark Sears was a little bit borderline. I would have been a tad surprised if he would have stayed in the NBA draft, but I thought that was massive for an Alabama team that it feels like they become Noah's Ark and that they've got two of everything.
And Alabama finally broke through the seal last season, and he's the biggest reason as to why, because what really kind of has hurt Nate Oates over his tenure at Alabama and even going back to Buffalo is that their guards were just kind of traditional scorers and scorers only. Well, Mark Sears just kind of being that body and that physical body who can score and play defense, I think added such an element to that team. And him going back to Alabama is such a big retain piece that it's almost like an addition.
Oh, it certainly is. And with Alabama, the way that they've been able to maneuver in the transfer portal over the last few years, I think that's been massive for them. And then they pretty much got all of their NBA draft decisions guys back in the fold, as well as Stevenson is also going to be returning for them as well. As joining me on the show, we do have Rob Donaldson, who does great work over at the Rob's Best Show. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And when it comes to some of these guys that were in the NBA draft, a few of them are in the transfer portal. Obviously, the biggest one, in my opinion, is Coleman Hawkins, but Okana Onyesu, Jameer Watkins, Wooga Poplar. I think that these are all guys that can be very big impact guys. And as things were dwindling down in terms of the transfer portal and the guys that are available, this is big for some of those teams that might have struck out in the months of April and May.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, there are still a number of guys out there who I think can find new homes and really be instant impact performers. And obviously we're talking about the guys who just kind of stayed back and went to their same school, like a Peyton Sanford or Caleb Love or some of these other guys, Alex Garabin. But certainly there are some guys who are in that portal who can change the entire outlook on a college basketball season. And that's what's kind of still fun about the transfer portal is, it is the Wild West. There is a little bit of a downside to it, but at the same time, new faces going to new teams is pretty exciting, and certainly we got a little bit more on the way here.
Yep, you mentioned it. There are still quite a few guys that are out there in the transfer portal, or a few that come to mind for you that you feel like can be impact guys, whether they are guys that are in the transfer portal and were in the NBA draft, or guys that have just been sitting out there the last few months, because we've actually seen as well over the last few weeks a few guys decommit from their schools as well, which I thought once you committed that you couldn't enter back in, but apparently that's the case. And We've got a few of those guys like Duncan Poe, who's supposed to be going to Louisiana, now back out there for the taking.
There's a number of guys. You named a couple already with Hugo Poplar and Coleman Hawkins for certain. And, one of the guys that I think is just an absolute impact guy no matter where he goes. Whether or not he's a locker room guy, I think is still yet to be decided because this will be his potentially third team if he decides to leave Arkansas. But Trayvon Brazile, obviously coming off an injury, he's had a little bit of injuries kind of scattered throughout his tenure in college. But at the same time, man, a lengthy guy who can score and defend and he can just be that dynamic piece in your lineup. And then I'm also looking at kind of that lower end of the tier and a guy that I think could be an instant impact scorer at a high level. And that's Chauncey Jenkins from Old Dominion. Old Dominion was pretty bad last year. Obviously, Coach Jones had a heart attack when they were going out to Maui, and that kind of derailed what I thought could have been a good season for them. But Chauncey Jenkins was a lone bright spot, and he's a guy that wouldn't surprise me if he goes to a major school and ends up putting up serious points and gets up to that national pub.
Yeah, you saw a few guys from that Old Dominion team put up really nice numbers, and just so unfortunate what had happened with them because with having the just coaching search that they had to go through this offseason, that's just not great to say the least, and we shall see where they're going to be going moving forward as we do have Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the Rob's Web Show, trying to be right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I did think that was really interesting. One of the guys that was in the NBA draft immediately decided where he was going to be going, and this one was far from a shocker, but you did see with Jackson Robinson, he is going to be heading on over to Kentucky. This is something that we sort of thought might be in the works, but just what were some of your thoughts here? Because I do think that it was so big for Mark Pope to be able to bring over one or two of his guys from BYU. It's something that I'm personally a big fan of, and for Robinson, him being able to bust out towards the back half of the year last year, I think bodes very well for this Kentucky team moving forward.
And bringing in a guy that you just kind of know is going to be an instant impact guy, and a guy who I honestly think that a lot of times what gets overlooked with this new change to the if you don't sign an agent, you can return to school thing is a lot of these guys are refining their skills in these NBA camps and these NBA training sessions because, man, they are getting a look at the best of the best and kind of getting critiques on what NBA teams might be looking for. And when you are getting that criticism, sometimes that can kind of take you out of this kind of ball dominant sort of state of mind and just the all about me sort of state of mind where you're becoming more of a role guy and you're understanding the importance of developing those certain skills that you maybe lack. And I do think that can mean a lot when you're going to a different team. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think it's going to benefit Kentucky for sure.
Yep, absolutely. I know that you were alluding to Chauncey Jenkins a little bit before. It does look like he's going to be going to Seton Hall as well. And I want to get your thoughts here because with Seton Hall, my criticism of them throughout the offseason is that they really haven't signed a lot of bigs. And when it comes to this Seton Hall bunch, Era bunch that, as we know, they're going to be hard-nosed, they're going to be gritty, they're going to be taking on the just sort of mentality of the coaching staff. But how do you view the Seton Hall team coming up? Because in the Big East, I do think that's going to be relatively brutal, but I do think that as long as you've got sort of the philosophy in place, we saw what Seton Hall was able to do in the NIT this past season. I do think that this could be a team that busts out a little bit.
It's going to be interesting because obviously Shaheen Holloway is one of those guys that had the big pub, and it was a guy returning to his alma mater after a crazy run at St. Peter's. And it's also a team that has a lot of, veteran leadership within it. And now you're mentioning bringing in a scorer like Chauncey Jenkins, which I can't remember the last time. Maybe, I guess Miles Powell. We have to go back to him in terms of a dynamic guard who could score the buckets. I really do think that's kind of what they were missing. But also to your point, down low, Jaden Bediako is returning, and so that's huge. But at the same time, he's more of a big body scoring type guy who kind of plods. And so getting somebody who has a little bit of length and some athleticism is going to come easy. And this is a Big East league right now that is absolutely fully on emergence, and it's going to be top of the cream of the crop. And I do think Seton Hall is still going to be near that bottom to middle tier. Maybe I can be surprised, and maybe the guards for this team kind of step up, but that's kind of where I'm slotting them right now.
And there are a few teams that I think are very interesting in that they might be able to rise, but they might fall as well. Like, I take a look at Seton Hall, and I do think that they should be able to take a nice jump for this upcoming season, but I'm still a little bit more jury's out on them. I know that they're going to be well coached. I know that they're really going to be able to take on that mentality that you've got of Rick Pitino. Heck, they were the last team that actually gave UConn a test towards the back half of the season last year, because when they were playing at the Garden in the Big East tournament, that was the last single-digit game that UConn had actually played. But how do you feel about St. John's in that league as well? Because you just mentioned it. I do think that it is going to be very brutal out there, and I think that part of the reason why it is going to be is that you've got St. John's bringing in Kadari Richmond. You've got them bringing in Davion Smith, which I think is going to be a really good 1-2 punch in that backcourt.
Yeah, I'm so bullish on St. John's, and maybe it's just because I'm buying into the Rick Pitino hype once again, but man, to your point, adding Kadari Richmond, adding Davon Smith, who I thought was a fantastic role piece. Again, sometimes you can add a bunch of star power and they just do not mesh, and then you just have 5 really talented individuals who play like a mess together. Well, Davon Smith showed that he can be inserted in the starting lineup. He can get some separate minutes, maybe at 24 minutes per game, 20 minutes per game, and still be valuable coming off the bench. And that versatility and that gamesmanship and that just leadership that's going to be immediately there, I think that under Rick Pitino and that discipline that's already instilled is going to mean a lot. And so to your point, I really do think St. John's is going to be immediately in the mix in the Big East, and as they should. I mean, that's why you hire Rick Pitino. That's why you funnel so much money into the program. And that's why you're kind of going to Madison Square Garden as much as you can, because you're trying to build up this fan base again. And I think they're doing a great job of it.
Yep, and the lone thing that did not go their way is that Jordan Dingle, I know that he, along with Chris Ledlum, were trying to petition the NCAA for another year. That got turned down. But I do want to talk about this as well, because we saw something very interesting from the NCAA, and I don't know if this is going to have any sort of an impact for this upcoming season, but apparently anyone that was ineligible for part of the 2019-20 season is going to get an extra year of eligibility. I don't know if you read anything out of this. I don't know if we're going to be seeing some of these guys in their mid to late 20s coming out of the woodwork and trying to use that extra year of eligibility, but I did think that was a very interesting ruling that did come down on Thursday.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting. I did actually not hear that. This is the first time I'm hearing of it, but we just kind of saw something similar with Seth Towns. I mean, he was 27 playing for Howard this past season, and he had an extra year of eligibility somehow for this next season, but decided to turn it down. So we're living in a crazy time. I don't even know if the COVID year has run out or not, and kind of if they're just kind of making caveats or these exceptions to the rule at this point. It is what it is. There's a lot of different variety and a lot of different rules that I feel like are kind of getting passed over, and man, we're living in a whole new time, and what you're even just brought up just now is kind of blowing my mind.
And I mean, when I was going to college, they always called it a traditional 4-year plan in terms of trying to be able to graduate college, and now I feel like it's the non-traditional 4-year graduate when a guy actually gets out in 4 years, because it has gone just a little bit haywire there. And along those lines as well, we did see N'Faly Dante get turned down for an extra year of eligibility, and I know that there was some outrage about it, but I want to get your thoughts here, because I wasn't expecting him to be back at Oregon for this upcoming season. I was surprised that he was back for this upcoming year, but that said, I do think that at some point we do need to have a little bit of pushback, and N'Faly Dante not getting the extra year of eligibility, it's just not something where I'm really going to be crying from on this one.
Right. And I do think we got robbed a little bit of his career because of how many injuries he had and how dynamic of a player he was when he was actually healthy. But that's part of it, right? Like, that is part of the college experience, is sometimes we have to feel robbed so we can appreciate when the next player comes around and gives us those moments without getting injured. It is one of the unfortunate things, but not everything is going to be fair. And certainly with college, there's a time limit. There should be a time limit. These guys can't just stay in college forever, because then you're 7 years older than the guys coming in. And it's like, what are we even doing here? So I'm not crying tears over N'Faly Dante not getting approved for another year. And it is unfortunate at the same time that he can't come back, because he's a great talent. But whatever it is, I do like a hard stance on these sorts of things, and I don't like gray area. So I agree with the decision for sure.
Yep, I'm right there with you. For N'Faly Dante, it's not like he didn't get to play any college basketball at all. He got to play a full 5 years. And if you're using the games comparison, yeah, he played a couple fewer games than some of these other guys. And I do think that that's a little bit unfortunate with all the injuries that went down, but I'm right there with you on that as well. Like, just imagine if you could bring back like Tim Tebow to play at Florida for another year or something like that. Like, that'd be great for college football, but at some point it's like, all right, Tim, you're 30 some odd years old going up against a bunch of 18-year-olds. So I'm right there with you on that, as well as Rob Donaldson, who does great work over at the Rob's Best Bet Show. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I'll leave this one a little bit more open because now we do have the NBA draft decisions in the rear view mirror. Who's a team or two that, this can be from like the last week or two, what they've been able to do. This can be from like the last month and a half, what have you, but is there a team or two that you've just been diving into a little bit more, and the more that you look into them, the more that you look at that roster and what they've done here in the offseason, the more bullish you feel on them in general?
This might be a roster that I've already talked about on the show, and I do apologize if I have, but man, how can you not be impressed, or how can you not see a stark difference in potential and outlook on a season when you're kind of looking at last year's Louisville squad versus this year's Louisville squad? Because not only did they add everybody, there's like maybe one returning player from the last Louisville roster on this squad, but there's so much talent to go around. There's so much leadership, so much experience, and it felt like they added the right pieces on top of also getting Pat Kelsey, which is one of the best coaches in all of college basketball right now. So, man, when you're looking at the outlook, Louisville is going to be immediately competing for an ACC championship, and that's a crazy proposition when you've been looking at Louisville over the past couple of years. That's the team of the offseason for me, and I don't think there's a close second.
Yep, Louisville has been able to bring in a lot of guys, and Pat Kelsey is a coach I really do like, and there's someone that's going to be able to get it figured out in year number one under a brand spanking new roster. I do think that it's him, and a man that has everything figured out in terms of being able to give out great insights and being able to do a nice job of being able to profit is you, Rob. You do such an incredible job, whether that be on the baseball, football, or college basketball side of things. And I know you've got a lot of irons in the fire, so let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Hey, well, I always appreciate you having me on, Greg. And certainly I'm trying to figure out everything. I don't know if I have everything figured out, but we're chipping away. And for those who are wanting to follow my daily bets, you can do so at RobDFB on Twitter/X, and on YouTube at my channel, Rob Donaldson is just how you can find it. And as always, Greg, really appreciate having me on.
And we always love having Rob aboard. He does such a great job taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball all 12 months out of the year. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VC Family Podcast. And coming up next, this is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Thursday. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. It is always a pleasure to be able to get Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such great work over at his YouTube feed, youtube.com/Rob Donaldson, doing the Rob's Best Bet Show, whether that be college basketball, whether that be baseball, football, you name it, he does it. He's always on point with his analysis and his picks. So big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. I feel like the biggest thing is Jackson Robinson, not just that he pulls out of the NBA draft, but he decides that he's going to be heading on over to Kentucky. And for Kentucky, this is a really good get, as I always do like it when these guys follow their head coaches, because I think that this is just big for Mark Pope being able to really instill what he's looking to over at Kentucky. Robinson was the top scorer over at BYU last season. Would like to see him be a little bit more versatile, just 2.5 rebounds and 1.3 assists per contest, but shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, 14 points per game. He's really a nice go-to scorer, and you're bringing Kobe Bryant, who's one of the better scorers in terms of three-point shooting in all of college basketball season ago. They get back Andrew Carr, who I think he had an NBA draft decision along with Lamont Butler. Both of these guys are in the fold. They bring in Kirk Reese, so it can be a little bit of a roll of the dice, but I think that Mark Pope is going to be able to do a good job of being able to get the most out of him. Right now, you're looking at something for Kentucky. Not as many five-star guys as they had in the John Calipari era or anything like that, but that said, I do think that they are going to be in for a solid year out there in the SEC. Probably not on par with a school like Alabama or anything like that, but I do think that they're looking at a good year. This is a big piece of news. That's Duncan Boom Boom Powell. I thought that he was going to be one of the main guys for Louisiana last year over at Sacramento State. Led the team with 12.7 boards. I believe he also led the team in assists as well. He has decided that he is going to decommit from Louisiana. He's back out there in the transfer portal, and that's rough for a Louisiana team that they lose their main facilitator and famous Folks as we know, a few seasons ago, they had a really nice just low post presence in general, and this year with not having a Jordan Brown or anything like that, this is looking not so great for them. Kentrell Garnett is a nice three-point shooter, and Michael Thomas will be able to give you a little bit out there in the backcourt, but looking like it might be a little bit of a down year for Louisiana unless if they hook someone in, because, man, this is just not looking great to say the least, and it appears as though this man who was in the NBA draft, he's going to be following his coach as well. Cedric Howard, he is heading on over to Washington State, and I was wondering when Washington State was going to be able to get one of those big-time recruits, because David Riley, he's brought a few guys with him from Eastern Washington, but these were not necessarily the core guys of that team from the season ago. Ethan Price, LaJuan Watts, they're pretty solid along with Dane Erickstrup, but now you bring in the big fish. And Mr. Coward, 15.5 points, 6.5 boards, a steal per contest, shot 38% from three as a 6'6" combo player, and with Washington State, no longer are they playing in the Pac-12. Now they're playing a WCC schedule, which they are not on par with Gonzaga, but other than Gonzaga and St. Mary's, they should be the number 3 team in this conference. I almost feel like they're now the new BYU of the WCC for as long as this runs, because with BYU, they were a team that just usually would be able to make the NCAA tournament. They were able to do a very nice job of just being that little bit of a pest to St. Mary's and also Gonzaga. I feel like this is going to be the same for them. This is, I guess, a little bit of a cliffhanger on this podcast. Sean Buggs, who I believe he was in the NBA draft, he decided to pull out last year over at North Texas. He was logging about 7.5 points per contest and did shoot 45% from three. He reported, according to his Twitter/X feed, that he is committed to a school. He has not decided to announce what school yet, so we are waiting to see what school John Buggs actually committed to, but John Buggs reportedly has committed somewhere according to himself, which that's pretty interesting to say the least. New Mexico State, they were really lacking size last season. They were in need of that go-to rebounder. Appears as though they have found a San Diego transfer who began his career over at UC Irvine. Emmanuel Dominguez decided that he is going to be heading to New Mexico State. He was able to log about 5 rebounds per contest this last season. Would like to see him be a little bit of a better shot blocker for his size. He's not necessarily the world's greatest shot blocker, and 2 seasons ago, he had a little bit of a better year than he did last season over at San Diego. But that said, this is a big pickup for a New Mexico State team, and let's call it what it is. They had to pick up the pieces because they literally lost everything with the hazing scandal a few seasons ago. They had to replace the coach. They had to replace every single player on that roster that was completely swiped clean. And as we know, with just what happened with that situation, it lent just a little bit of a bad taste in many guys' mouth, but I feel like they've done the best with what they've been given to them in terms of the hand. They're bringing in Peter Filipowski, one of the top scorers and a 5+ rebound per game guy over at Maine from last season. You bring in Tanaj Petaway. He was over at Stony Brook, and then you also are going to be having Deontay Bostic, one of the top scorers from CSUN, Cal State Northridge, coming in as well. Bostic, not necessarily a guy that lights it up from three-point range or anything like that. Petaway, he is a guy that shoots only about 30% from distance as well. So this is clearly a core that it looks like they're going to be taking on a defensive first approach. Not really a lot of three-point shooting on the roster, but you know what? With them being able to just show some rough and tumble out there in Conference USA, I do think that they are going to be able to go northward. Abdul Masaga, he was over at St. Louis this last season. He has decided that he is going to be going to Wyoming. He redshirted, but he's a 6'7", little bit of a combo player. I believe that he was playing for France out there professionally for a little bit of time. He's someone that should be able to make a little bit of an impact for a Wyoming team that has really made a lot of moves here in the last few weeks. You have to love the way that this program has been able to hit the ground running with the new bring your juice sort of approach. I absolutely love what you're able to see out of Sundance Wicks from UW Green Bay last season, and being someone from the state of Wisconsin, a little bit salty that he decided to leave, but you completely understand why. And they bring in Yutu Yamanachi Williams, 6'10" big man that's able to pop it from three-point range. Kobe Dune, I think, is going to be able to do a nice job in the backcourt. Tuki Tanamo, who had already decided to commit to the program when Jeff Linder was there. Sounds like he's going to be staying put as well. So, all in all, Wyoming doing a very good job with the hand that they have been dealt. Typically, when you lose a coach in mid-May, it doesn't necessarily result this well, but Sundance Wicks, he's a guy that has just lived, eaten, breathed, what have you, Wyoming basketball, and clearly he's doing a great job with this program, and he's been able to do a nice job building this roster here in the last few weeks. We are also seeing some guys that were at the D1 level decide that they're going to go down to the non-D1 level, like Ant Abraham. Last season, he was over at Texas A&M Commerce. didn't necessarily do a ton for them. And as we know, Texas A&M Commerce, up until a few seasons ago, they were a D2 school, and now he's heading down to the D2 level to UNC Pembroke. He last year had 2.5 points per contest. Did shoot, to his credit, 44% from three-point range the last 2 seasons out there in the Southland. So very much a nice three-point shooter, but guy that was a little bit skittish to shoot, really didn't see a ton of minutes. He has decided that he is going to be heading down to the non-D1 level, and these are very easy for your handicap. All you need to note is that our good friend Mr. Abraham has decided that he is going to be going down to the non-D1 level. After last season he was at the D1 level. Cross him off your list of guys that you need to evaluate and break down, and you're able to move on with your life. So those are ones that I do like to see. And then you've got Valentino Pinedo. He was over at Eastern Carolina this last season. He's decided that he's going to be going to St. Francis of Pennsylvania, and this is a good get for St. Francis of Pennsylvania. As for Pinedo, 6'7", a little bit of a combo player, not necessarily a guy that shot a lot of threes. When he was over at East Carolina, he was much more of a defensive stopper at right around about 6'7", 225 pounds. Not really a notable guy coming out of high school or anything like that. 247 Sports didn't necessarily have the world's highest grade on him. A lot of that is because he comes over from Spain, so he was a little bit of an international man from Missouri. We will see if he's going to be able to give them anything moving forward, but I do think that that's going to be helpful for them. And then this is another one of these D1 guys that has decided that he is getting down to the non-D1 level, and this one I actually think is a little bit notable. I'm not going to call him like some end-all be-all sort of player, but Montez Young, he last season was over at UT Arlington. 2 years ago, it was when he was able to have really his best year. He was able to log for the team about 3 points, 3 boards, a little bit more of a rim protector. He has decided that he is going to be moving on over to Academy of Art, which I remember they knocked off UC Davis a few seasons ago. So once again, very easy for a handicap. All you need to note is that this gentleman, who I believe redshirted last season, you're no longer going to need to break him down. He's now going to be at the non-D1 level, so you're able to move on with your life, and we are keeping you guys up to date with everything that's happening in college basketball. We are now through draft decisions, so things are starting to crystallize just a little bit more, and now we're going to be able to look at these teams in a little bit more depth. And we should be able to start these conference previews relatively soon as well, which I'm very much looking forward to. And if you did like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at @GN_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Otherwise, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bet Show for joining me in my segment, coming at you guys every single day, regular season and off season on this podcast. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.